G'day everyone, Joe here from Wolf Builders. Today we are lucky enough to come down to Vic Forest up in Hillsville and meet with Bill, Paul and Adam and just run through the forestry industry and how we go about logging and what gets designated for logging in bushlands, native bushlands. G'day Bill.
Hey Joe, how are you?
G'day Adam.
Hey Joe.
Thanks for having me guys. So do you guys just look after eucalypt or do you also look after pine as well? Because there's so much pine plantation. Yeah.
We only look after the state native forests.
Oh, okay. So it's just the state native forest,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Through the Vic government.
Correct.
Yeah.
State-owned enterprise managing the stuff that's on state forest.
Statewide.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. But it wasn't always statewide. You've only just taken it
Correct.
statewide.
We used to be only east of the Hume Highway.
Yep.
And given the list by the government, and so
Okay.
asked to manage that on behalf, and I guess it's still being managed. It's so early in the piece.
Because Alistair was saying what an awesome job you guys were doing
Well,
out that way.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I guess we see ourselves as very customer focused. You know, our key values in Vic Forest is professional, sustainable, customer focused, and safe. That's
right.
That's where we roll. And so, you know, without customers, and that goes right through to, you know, the end consumer.
Yeah, right.
We don't have an industry. So
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a different focus. We do look at Alistair as a customer,
Yeah.
whereas I guess the department looked at him as a licensee to regulate.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's just a little different focus for us.
Okay. Well, that'd change a lot, looking at things that way. Because you're working with someone to create a standard in the industry that spreads across, you know, whether it just be housing or furniture making, whereas before it would just be, well, here's just another miller, you know,
Yep.
that kind of a thing.
yeah, it's a holistic view of the industry, and I think that's something that, you know, when Vic Forest came about, it's given us the chance to do that because we're only a small organisation. There's probably less than 110 of us probably at the moment.
Oh, right.
Yeah, at our peak we were about 160 staff.
Okay.
And then we've gradually wound our staff numbers back as the resources reduced, obviously, for the fire damages and impacts. Yeah, we're only small, and I suppose being small, you can be fairly agile and responsive to customer needs and also, you know, environmental needs and things like that.
So how much of Victoria is allowed to be milled, basically? How much is allocated? How much of the bushlands?
Probably,
Some figures there.
look, I'll exclude the west for a moment because we don't have a good handle on
Okay.
what we've just been handed. But
Yep.
previously we would have talked about this, we would have said there's about a bit over 7 million hectares of public forest.
Right.
We operate on what's available and suitable on about 1.1 million hectares,
Okay.
which I think is even less than that.
Mm.
And then we operate annually on about 0.01% of that.
Yeah, right.
It's a pretty small area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something that'd be worth understanding is just that level of planning regime, I suppose, that it sits to explain how we exist. You've sort of got, at the very top of the heap, the sort of Montreal Protocol, which you might have heard of, which was, you know, world agreed thing,
No.
positions on forest, and then,
Yeah, right.
anyway.
Was this worldwide, sorry? Or is this
Montreal
just
process is a worldwide
Okay.
view of how we manage forests across the world.
Yep.
And as part of that, I suppose the federal government got a bit of a view that they
Yep.
needed to have a bit of a place in it.
Yep.
So they mandated that the states develop regional forest agreements,
Right, okay.
which still stand today.
Yeah, they're about to end a 20-year agreement, so coming up for
Oh.
their life's getting close to
Right.
over, so the governments will have to work out how to renew or change them.
Okay. So who took care of the West before you guys had the West?
The RFA's mandate, this has to be done. Out of that came what we would call forest management plans,
Yep.
which are individual across, say, the state of Victoria. I think there's 12 or 13.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Thereabouts across the state of Victoria. West, all these areas have their own separate document, which
Yep.
basically takes up their land that's available, which excludes parks and reserves.
Yep.
What's left is taken up, and the key criteria of how much area they want to reserve, which is sort of mandated under the RFA, says you need to keep this much for that, that much for that. So then they break it up and say, of all the state forest that's left, they have X percentage needs to be protected for these values. So then they put what's called, say, a special protection zone within state forest, which is an area that, from our perspective, is effectively like a park. We don't work within state special protection zones.
Yeah,
Then
right.
you've got a special management zone, which allows us to operate, but under certain guidelines. So it might be that, you know, you can't cut X more than a certain amount of hectares in this area annually or over 10 years, so there's a bit more control on it. And then you've got what we would call general management zone, which is areas that are effectively put aside and said these areas of forest will be primarily for recreation, but timber production purposes are the
Okay.
number one reason for these to
right.
exist. So we can operate within those fairly freely.
Yeah.
But when I say freely, the Code of Forest Practice is the overarching document
Right.
that sits on a side of it, which is effectively our Bible or our director of
Your guidelines.
direction.
It's the environmental regulatory
Yeah, okay.
document that we have to work to.
Yeah.
Right.
It says
So-
a stream that is this wide and that deep needs to have a buffer of X metres on it.
Right,
So it's
okay.
got some very clear guidelines on how
Okay.
it operates.
So you have national park, you have state forest. State forest
State
is
park.
broken up into special protection, special management, general management.
Okay,
zones.
all right, yeah.
Then the general management zone gets further broken down based
Oh,
on
right.
what's operationally suitable,
Okay,
and then we start to find other prescriptive reasons to exclude areas for further habitat or
right,
for plants and animals.
okay.
So we keep reducing it right down. That's why we get down to the 6%
Yeah, right,
figure of what's suitable and available.
okay.
So there's just, you keep bringing it down, and from that we then plan our timber harvesting, and we have to do that on a sustainable basis well into the future. So
Yeah,
we
right.
need to be able to keep supplying it. So if we haven't cut now, we can't supply it in the future.
Yeah,
so we need
right.
to set our cut limits at a place where we can keep supplying it
Okay.
every year into the future.
So you say 6%, is that that's 6% statewide?
Of the total public forest
Oh.
estate.
Wow. All right. So do we break that down to a yearly basis? Does that get divided up? That 6%, does that get divided?
Yeah, so it's, we operate on about 1/100th each year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got to rotate, different rotation ages for different forests. So
Okay.
Mountain ash, nominally we harvest every 80 years.
Okay.
It might start at 50 years
Yep.
and move to say 120 years, but
Yeah.
nominally it's about 80 years.
Yep.
Other species might be 100-year rotation, some might be
Okay.
120 years. So
Yeah, right.
it's about 100 years approximately.
Okay.
So
Because I know that we've got a lot of timber that's gone, like eucalypt is now overseas quite a lot. We've got
Mhm.
a heap of eucalypt throughout China, Russia,
South
Morocco,
South
South
Africa.
Africa. We got a lot brought back. This is going back about, it would have been 10 years ago. We brought in a lot of eucalypt timber, hardwood, and it was very soft. It was almost like balsa wood because the conditions weren't there. It was a very pliable timber, but it just broke apart. It would split, it would break. How do you guys govern such good quality timber in Australia? Because we've got some really good quality timber in Victoria. So how do we govern that?
well, it's just grown naturally.
Yeah, right.
Grown naturally means it's grown in conditions that have pests, diseases, different weather conditions,
Droughts.
Yeah.
droughts.
Snow.
Let's slow it right down. If you take eucalypts out of the natural environment, put them somewhere else, they don't have any of those pests and
Yeah,
diseases.
right,
And
okay.
they can grow so much quicker.
Right.
There's nothing stopping them slowing them down.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Because this is going back many years ago. I was under the understanding that hardwood timber in Victoria got harvested about 20, 25 years. But after speaking with Alistair and now you guys, now I'm understanding that we don't harvest our timber, 60 years, 80 years?
Probably,
Depending on species, obviously.
Mountain ash, we started harvesting of 30 on mountain ash about 50, 55 years.
Okay.
Some of the fastest
Okay.
growing was early,
Yeah.
but there's still 39 mountain ash, or alpine ash rather, that we haven't even
Oh, wow.
touched yet. There's still 39 regrowth at
Different-
places like Matlock,
Yep.
same age wood,
Yep.
that's still quite small, and in fact we were only thinning it 10 years ago.
Oh.
So it's just the nature of where it's growing, the site conditions. This stuff's at a much higher elevation,
Yeah, right.
it's colder.
Yep.
Stuff that's growing up there is probably again a better quality timber than some of the stuff that grows down lower.
Yeah,
So
right.
you'll have less interference from gum veins and things like that, just depending on those site qualities.
So thinning it out and burning back, how do we go about those two things? With the thinning out, obviously, is ironbark, yellow box, that kind of eucalypt.
Yeah, so different forest types will do different things. So
Yep.
in our species in the west, we've got very low intensive harvesting regimes because the forests are uneven aged, slow growing.
Yep.
So we tend to do single tree selection. We'll take out bigger trees
Yeah, right.
to start with,
Yep.
dug over the saw logs,
Yep.
and then might come through if we've got a lot of sort of middle-sized type trees, for example.
Yep.
We might thin that out a little bit for some posts and poles,
Right.
and then leave a group that will grow on
Yeah,
in the
right.
saw log rotation.
Okay.
And we might thin another bit out for firewood, where we know those trees aren't going to grow on to anything of value.
Yeah, right.
So we leave the forest after we've harvested for that, with a set of trees of different ages, all about to grow on to the next
Okay.
group.
Yeah, right.
But otherwise, we also get areas of forest that have been, they had some event like fire, and they've all regenerated at the same age.
Yeah,
so
right.
We're really thick stocking and treat all the same, or go through and thin those, because naturally the forests are going to thin out themselves.
Yep.
Some of those trees will die.
Yep.
What we can do is come in and remove some of those trees that might die, we can utilise them, but it then releases the other trees to grow on
Yeah, right.
better.
I was down in the Grampians recently, and I was having a look at different growth of different tree species down there. On the way to and from, there's the freeway, the new freeway that's running down.
Yep.
There's a lot of tree plantations that are on the sides of the road. And do you select perfect areas for the perfect tree, or the perfect tree for the perfect areas?
Those trees will be privately owned and privately managed.
Okay.
We won't have anything to do with
Oh,
them.
right,
No.
okay.
Yep. So they're all being grown on private land. Yeah, I think. So there's companies growing that mostly for paper production.
Yeah,
bulk
okay.
paper production.
Oh, right.
So they'll have a short rotation of perhaps 10 to 15 years.
Yeah,
straight.
correct.
So our residual wood, for what we can't sell the soil of,
Yep.
we'll sell our wood
Yeah, okay.
In the east of the state, yeah.
in the east of the state.
Yeah.
Right.
Stuff in the west, we're not doing any wood chip sales currently.
Okay.
Stuff in the east, particularly in around where you're sitting now, the vast majority of the what we'd call residual product, the bit that's left over after the log's taken off,
Yeah,
will
right.
be going to Australian Paper at Maryvale
Okay.
for directly to be turned into paper and manufactured into a ream of paper.
So do they get some of our bushland, or they don't get any of our bushland? That's all basically privately owned timber that goes into paper production.
I know.
No, they get our trees.
Oh, okay.
So what we do is we cut down a tree,
Yep.
we remove saw log out of it.
Yep.
Everything goes saw log, we'll send saw log.
Right.
Then what's up the top of the tree or defective
Yep.
goes to Australian paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so we utilise those.
Yes.
We utilise any
Rather
of
than
the
leaving it
offcuts.
in the forest.
Yeah, right.
To point out is that anywhere that we operate, we are obliged under the Code of Forest Practice and our other certifications, we don't convert anything to a different product. So whatever was there first, what we harvest from that site is what we put back. We
Yeah,
don't,
right.
we don't go and change the species to something suitable
Okay,
or something
yeah.
faster. So
Yeah,
if
yeah.
there was mountain ash growing there, we were obliged to put mountain ash back.
Okay,
So,
yeah, okay.
we
And
don't-
with seed from the general area.
That's right.
Yeah,
We
right.
can't change the genetics of the site.